It was late in the afternoon when I found myself sitting on the worn-out couch in my friend's living room, staring out the window as the sun began to set. My mind was clouded with thoughts, most of them revolving around her as mom. The woman who, despite the years between us, seemed to carry an aura that was undeniable. I couldn't help but notice her grace, her confidence. But there was something deeper, something that lingered in the air whenever our eyes met, a look that spoke volumes. I had known Michael's family for years, and in all that time, I'd never once considered her in this way. But now, things felt different. She was older, yes, but it only added to her allure. There was an undeniable pull between us, one I had been ignoring for weeks. It was as if she knew what I was feeling, her subtle glances, her quiet touches when we spoke. Each time I felt her presence, it stirred something inside me. I had to admit, I was intrigued. But more than that, I was conflicted. She was Michael's mother, and that fact alone should have made these feelings impossible. Yet here I was, captivated, torn between my loyalty to Michael and an attraction that felt so strong it made my heart race. What was I supposed to do with these emotions? She hadn't said anything, but I could feel the tension between us growing each time we were near each other. I leaned back against the couch, closing my eyes, trying to push the thoughts away. But even in the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The thought of it left me both excited and terrified. Michael's mom, Lisa, had always been kind to me, almost like a second parent. She was the type of woman who exuded elegance effortlessly. Her movements were deliberate, her words always measured. But beneath that composed exterior was a warmth that drew people to her. Over the years, she had become a pillar in Michael's life, especially after his father left. I admired her strength, her ability to hold her family together despite the circumstances. For me, life hadn't been as stable. My parents split when I was young, leaving me constantly seeking places where I felt I belonged. That's how I ended up spending so much time at Michael's house. It was my escape, a place filled with laughter, warmth, and a sense of stability I'd never known. Lisa's presence had always been comforting, but recently, it had begun to feel different. Lisa was widowed now, and while she masked her loneliness well, there were moments where I could see it. Like the evenings when Michael was out and it was just the two of us at the dinner table. Her conversations grew more personal, her laughter softer. Her hand would linger a little longer on mine when she passed me a plate or reached for the coffee pot. Each interaction seemed charged with an energy I couldn't quite define, but I could feel it. And then there was me constantly battling with my conscience. She was my best friend's mother. I had no business feeling this way about her, yet I couldn't deny the pull. The way her eyes seemed to linger when she spoke to me, or how her smile seemed just a little brighter when I walked into the room. It was in these stolen moments that the conflict inside me grew. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things, projecting feelings onto her that she didn't share, or if there was something real between us. The thought of crossing that line felt dangerous, wrong even. But the idea of letting it go felt impossible. And Lisa seemed to be caught in the same turmoil. I could see it in her subtle hesitations, the way she'd quickly look away when our eyes met. There was an undeniable connection between us, but neither of us dared to take the first step. Not yet. The house was quiet that evening, except for the faint hum of the rain hitting the windows. Michael had gone out with friends, leaving me alone with Lisa. I'd planned to leave early, but she insisted I stay for dinner. There was nothing unusual about it. We'd shared countless meals over the years, but tonight felt different. As we sat across from each other at the dining table, the air seemed heavier. Lisa wore a soft cardigan that hung loosely off her shoulders, revealing the delicate curve of her collarbone. I couldn't help but notice how her hands moved when she poured the wine, graceful yet trembling ever so slightly. She caught me staring and smiled, but it wasn't her usual warm, maternal smile. This one lingered, carrying an undercurrent of something unspoken. After dinner, she suggested we move to the living room. The dim lighting and the crackle of the fireplace added to the intimacy of the moment. I sat on the couch, trying to focus on anything but her, but my resolve wavered when she sat beside me closer than she normally would. As she reached for a blanket, her hand brushed against mine, sending a jolt through me. It was such a simple gesture, yet it felt loaded with meaning. Her fingers lingered for a moment longer than necessary before she pulled away, her cheeks slightly flushed. We fell into a conversation, but I could barely concentrate. The way her voice softened when she spoke to me, the way her eyes seemed to search mine as if looking for permission, it was all too much and not enough at the same time. At one point, she leaned forward to adjust the blanket, and her hair fell across her face. Without thinking, I reached out, gently tucking it behind her ear. My hand brushed her cheek, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Her breath hitched, and I felt mine catch in my throat. She looked at me, her lips slightly parted as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. The space between us felt unbearable, a thin line we both wanted to cross but were too afraid to. Then she broke the moment, standing up abruptly and moving toward the window. "It's raining harder now," she murmured, her voice unsteady. I followed her, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her but not touching her. When she turned to face me, her eyes glistened not from tears, but from something deeper. "You should probably go before it gets worse," she whispered, though her tone lacked conviction. I nodded, but neither of us moved. The tension between us was palpable, a magnetic force pulling us closer yet holding us back. My hand hovered near hers, our fingers brushing briefly before I pulled away, unsure of what would happen if I stayed any longer. And as I stepped out into the rain, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something neither of us could ignore much longer. The storm outside had grown fiercer, but inside the house, the air felt electrified, as though the storm had made its way into the living room. I stood frozen near the door, Lisa's voice still echoing in my head, "You should go." Yet, she hadn't moved away from me, hadn't stepped back to reinforce her words. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were wide, searching, and I could see the same conflict that churned inside me mirrored there. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but hesitated. The tension that had been simmering between us for weeks, months, maybe broke through my restraint. "I can't do this anymore," I murmured, my voice trembling with a mix of frustration and longing. Pretending this doesn't mean anything. Her breath caught, and she took a small step closer, her hand brushing against the edge of the table for balance. "Do you think this is easy for me?" she said, her voice cracking. "Every time you're here, She stopped, pressing her lips together as though afraid to say the words out loud. I closed the distance between us in a heartbeat. "Say it," I urged softly, my voice barely above a whisper. Her chest rose and fell as though she were struggling to catch her breath. "I can't stop thinking about you," she admitted, her words spilling out in a rush. "And I hate myself for it." But she didn't finish, and she didn't need to. The moment hung in the air, heavy and fragile. Slowly, tentatively, I reached for her hand. When she didn't pull away, I stepped closer until the space between us vanished. The first touch of our lips was hesitant, almost as if we were testing the weight of what this meant. But then, the hesitation melted away, replaced by a desperate need to close the distance that had kept us apart for so long. Her hands found their way to my shoulders, and mine settled at her waist, pulling her closer. It wasn't just a kiss, it was an unspoken confession, a surrender to everything we'd been denying ourselves. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathless, she rested her forehead against mine. "This changes everything," she whispered. "I know," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging both outside and within us. "But I don't care anymore." The storm outside continued to rage, but in that moment, the only thing that mattered was us. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, casting a warm glow over the room. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the empty coffee mug in my hand. The storm had passed, both outside and within me, but the air still carried the weight of everything that had happened. Lisa walked into the room, her hair loose and a little messy, as though the night had stolen some part of her usual composure. She paused when she saw me, her expression guarded yet tender, like someone still deciding whether to open the door fully or keep it slightly ajar. Neither of us spoke right away. The silence was thick, but not uncomfortable. It felt like a pause in a song, the kind that lets you savor what came before and anticipate what's to come. "I didn't sleep much," she finally admitted, leaning against the doorway. "Me neither," I said, glancing at her. Too much to think about. She stepped closer, folding her arms as if to shield herself from the vulnerability. Between us. Last night, it wasn't a mistake, she said, her voice steady but soft. Hearing those words should have been a relief, but they hit me with a mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also uncertainty. What now? I asked, voicing them. Question that had been circling my mind since the first light of dawn. She sighed and sat down beside me, close enough that our knees touched. I don't know, she admitted, but I know I can't go back to pretending this doesn't exist. Whatever this is, it's real. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. Real doesn't mean easy, though, I said, a small, rueful smile tugging at my lips. She returned the smile, her fingers brushing against mine. No, it doesn't. But maybe it's worth it. The words hung in the air, filled with both hope and hesitation. We didn't have answers, but for the first time in a long time, we weren't running from the questions. As I walked out the door a little later, the sun fully risen now, I felt a shift within me. This wasn't an ending, not really. It was a beginning, messy and uncertain, but filled with possibility. And for now, that was enough.